What happens this week? Summer begins. Hard to believe it. Summer begins. Wonder what type of summer it'll be.
I heard it predicted it will be cooler.
You're going to say it's going to be cooler.
That's what I heard.
There you go. Well, we'll accept what you heard. Your forecast is as good as about anybody else's these days, quite honestly. The story that we're going to take a look at today is one that's it's kind of dark, especially for Father's Day. It's kind of a dark story. It's a story of Jesus driving the demon out of a man possessed by a demon. Now, we don't hear much about demons these days. If you remember back, I guess it was like in the 60s, there was a series of movies that came out about demons. The Exorcist, I think, was sort of the main one that came out. In the time of Jesus, people did not understand the workings of the mind. If someone was different, they'd be ostracized. Now, that's not totally true, because if someone had survived birth and had a condition like Down syndrome, for example, they would be taken in by the village, and they would be part of the village, and the whole village would look after that person. That person would find some menial work that they could do, maybe chopping wood or carrying wood or milking cows or something that didn't take a lot of skill level. But they would be looked after. But if someone had a mental condition that caused them to be violent, they would be driven out of the village. They couldn't afford to have someone violent in their community. There was no compassion. Now, again, that's not totally true. They would have likely have sent some type of food out regularly and put it in a spot where that person could get nourishment. But we know that the person that we're talking about today was without clothes, not living within a home, living in tombs, in caves outside of the village, totally ostracized, and had been at one point in chains. And his strength was such that he could break the chains, and that's why he was driven out of the village. Now, I don't know if you have met individuals that have extreme strength, who have a mental illness. But you know, most of the mental illnesses that we come across today have now been diagnosed, have been given a term, treatment has been established, and it would not have been as severe a situation as what Jesus came across. In 67, I guess it would likely be, maybe even 68, Fran and I were going out together. I guess it would have been 68. Fran was taking nursing at Women's College Hospital in Toronto. And I was attending Ryerson, taking social services. We both had experiences that year that were quite traumatic to us. Fran's placement in her last year was to spend some time at Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital in Toronto. And she told me that they went down as a group of about 8 to the hospital, took public transportation. For some reason, she was held up, had to go to the director of nursing for something. And by the time she came out, the group, the 7 of them, had already got on the Bay Street streetcar and had headed down to Queen Street to take the Queen Street car out. So she jumped on the next car. And by the time she got to Lakeshore Psychiatric, I don't know if you ever saw it or not when you've been in Toronto. It's a big, huge facility down by the lake. She had to keep asking people where she had to go as a student nurse. And they had told them to wear their civics, not wear uniforms, to wear their normal clothes, their weekend clothes. And she said she had her badge saying that she was a student nurse, but that's all she had. So anyways, they kept trying to catch up to the group, and they did at last. And one person in the group had been assigned a key. And the group was told to stay together and to leave together because they needed that key to get out. Once you were in, you were locked in. And you were locked in until the end of the shift. Now, the group that she was working with, they had mental illness issues, but they weren't violent. Those were in another building. They spent most of their day doing activities with them, playing games, shooting billiards, talking to them, trying to develop a rapport with the individuals to get them prepared to leave this facility and go back out into the community. But she said, and Fran was the shortest of the group. I mean, there was one there that was about 6'3", 6'4", and then there was little Fran. She said her greatest fear was she wouldn't be with the group when they left, and the gal with the key opened and shut, because how was she going to prove that she was not a patient? That was her biggest fear. And she used to really worry about that when we would go out together. Mine was a bit different. Russell Jolliffe, who was the chair of our division in social services, had arranged for us to take a bus trip as a class. We had a class of about 22. And we went up to Aurelia, to a place called Huronia Regional Center. And we arrived, and we all got out, and we looked around. And once again, the setting was beautiful. It was on the lake up there, and the buildings were all white and bright and cheery. And we went as a group. And as we walked by a group of people that were walking along, I said to somebody, "Gee, they must have floor hockey teams here or something," because a number of people were wearing helmets. And I thought, they must have some activities. That'd be interesting to kind of get to know. So anyways, we were given a person to take us on a tour. And we went into a facility, a room, or a building. And they said to us, "Now, this is a ward situation." They said, "So you're going to see that the rooms are set up with about 20 people in each room, and they're cots set up, cot by cot by cot." And we walked in, and we looked around, and these people were all bedridden. There were people who had developmental disabilities. There were people that had cleft mouths, people that had or microscopic or hydrocephalic heads, in other words, very small or very large heads for their body size. A number of people would have one eye in the forehead, and that would be all they would have. And we walked down this long row, 10 beds on each side. And I thought to myself, I don't think I can make this, quite honestly. This was pretty traumatic for me. So we got through and we asked a few questions to show that we were being polite. Obviously, these people were non-verbal. Staff were walking around. Then we were taken into another unit, which was all children. And these were cribs. And again, there would have been likely 10, maybe 15 cribs in this room. They were stainless steel cribs. And every one of them had a top that was stainless steel. In other words, it was a cage. It had a sliding door on the side that allowed staff to be able to change them. It was, again, these children were quite severe. They didn't seem to have the same physical disabilities as the others, but they were all looking totally uncomfortable, most of them crying. There was very little human touch that we could see. Staff were doing their best. And then we went through, and then we met in a conference room where they asked us they told us the history of the facility and the fact that it had been taken over for what they called a provincial school for the mentally retarded back in those days. And I was pretty shaken, quite honestly, very shaken. Again, we were polite. In fact, we asked some questions. And I said, you must have some sport. You must have some higher functioning individuals here, do you? And they said, oh, yeah, we do, yeah. I said, well, do they have to play floor hockey? He says, no, why would you say that? I said, well, when we came in, I saw a number of people that had helmets on. And they said, oh, that's because they have seizures. And some of them seizure up to 20 times a day. And they'll drop, and to protect their head, we have these helmets on them. I said, oh, I see. That makes sense to me. So I got home and I said to Fran, on a date we went out, I said, there is no way I'm working in this field. I mean, that decision has been made for me. I am not working in this field. I just could not handle this. Well, things change. Things change. I did work, as you know, as a youth worker for the United Church of Canada in downtown Hamilton. That didn't work out, unfortunately. I made a decision to quit my job due to the fact I couldn't get my program into an area that I considered safe for the kids. Our building was actually down by the Hydro building in Hamilton, where the parking lot and Eaton's are down there. And to get to it, the kids had to walk by the bus terminal and across John Street, which was 4 lanes going in one direction. And these kids were 5 to 18 sort of thing, but most of them 5 to about 14. And I went to my supervisor and said, this is not a safe environment for us to run this program. It was an old church, Wesley Community Center, or Wesley Church, that became the kind of the mission program for the United Church of Canada in downtown Hamilton. The sanctuary was covered with clothes. People had donated and people would come in to get their clothes and that sort of stuff. And I ran a youth program out of the gym. Very small, typical downtown church gym sort of thing. And I said, Dr. McKenzie, we've got to find another location. This is not safe. And he says, well, we don't have the money for another location. I said, well, we're putting kids at risk by crossing this street. And he said, well, they know that area. They live down there. I said, they live in the subdivision or the town or the houses down past that, but they don't normally come across, to the downtown core. Anyways, he said, no, I can't fund it. And I said, well, then I have to resign. I can't take that risk. Pretty bold thing for me to do, eh? Especially when Fran was 3 months pregnant. She was not impressed by my decision, I can tell you. So I went back to Russell Jolliffe, this chairman of my board, and said this is what I had done. He'd been giving me some supervisory skills because I didn't have a social worker within the church structure to support me. So I'd been going in about every 3 weeks and having a session with him, and I told him what I did, and he said, well, I think you're absolutely right. He said, I'll help you find another job. I said, well, that would be great. So he made a few phone calls, and he phoned me up, and he said, I've got an interview for you. It's with the Ontario Association for the Mentally Retarded back in those days. I said, what? I said, do you remember that trip we took in Aurelia? He said, yes. I said, I swore I'd never work in that field. He said, well, this is a bit different, Keith. This is kind of an administrative job. Go down and have a chat with them and try it and see what it's like. So I went down, had an interview, and got a job as what was called a representative for the provincial association. And my territory went from Oshawa to Windsor to Wyerton. There was about 65 community associations like Woodstock Developmental Services and other small agencies, Listwell, Stratford, that sort of stuff. And I would go in and help the board develop programs. And over the time, I got to know many of the individuals. And I felt this was not a bad job, although it took me away from home a lot. And by that time, we had a baby, Robin. And I thought, I've got to find something where I'm not away all week and only go home on weekends and still going out every other weekend to do training. That's not fair to Fran, to try to bring this child up. So I got my first position working with Mississauga Association as an executive director and really got to know the people that we supported. And they found them loving and had great potential if we could find the way to open the key to get to them. So God moves in very interesting ways, very interesting ways. This gentleman that Jesus met was severely mentally challenged. And Jesus drew out of him the demons or whatever that was inside of him that was causing the issue. And they said, "Can you put us in the pigs?" And why would that be a natural thing for Jesus to do? Where do the pigs stand in the Jewish religion? Unclean. You can't eat ham. You can't eat pigs in the Jewish religion. Why? Because the majority of people didn't know how to cook it. And you could get really sick. So it became one of the laws of the 350 some odd laws this is one of them. Do not eat unclean meat. And pigs were that unclean meat. Shellfish was another one that fell into that same problem. If you didn't know how to cook it properly, you could become seriously sick or actually die. So that was listed in their dietary things. So Jesus did that. He had the spirits move out of that man and go into what was considered by the Jewish faith unclean animals. And when they hit the animals stampeded. And they ran into the lake, into the sea, and they ended up drowning. Now, can you imagine the power that Jesus has to be able to do that? What happens in the community? Well, to drive a demon out of another person, obviously you have to be a demon yourself. So they said, this man, who we call Jesus, must come from the devil. So therefore we have to get him also out of our community. So they drive him out too. And the man that he cured comes to him and drops to his knees and says, "Take me with you." Now, it likely would have been much better for that man if Jesus had said, "Yes, join us and come." Because he's going to find it very difficult to become accepted back in that community again because of all that they had remembered about him. But Jesus says, "No. I want you to stay, and I want you to tell the story of how God loved you, cured you. That's your job now. You're to go out and spread the word. Tell people about what God has done for you." And then Jesus leaves. Now, what can we take from that? Well, Jesus has told us, told the disciples, and has told those that follow him that we have a responsibility to tell the story. We sang just a few minutes ago a hymn, "Tell Me the Old Stories of Jesus." We have a responsibility to do that. Today, Juanita was sitting waiting to go for Reed to arrive to pick her up to come to church today. And she was sitting on a bench outside of our apartment building, or one of our apartment buildings, and a lady was sitting with her, waiting for her son to arrive. And the lady said, "Well, I'm going out to have lunch with my son. Are you waiting for someone to take you out for lunch?" Now, I don't know, Reed, whether you plan to do that or not, but she said, "No, actually, I'm going to church." And the lady said, "I used to go to church, but I'm so annoyed with them that I refuse to go anymore. I would rather worship God in this beautiful outdoors. I would like to do that." Reed arrived. Juanita couldn't finish what she likely would have said.
I started to say, "Come to our church."
That's right. You started to say, "Come to our church," because the people are friendly. And that's the sort of thing that we need to have happen. We need to be able to say to people, what's happened in the past is the past. Accept what God is offering you. There's an invitation here. Now, a lot of people won't accept it. They just won't accept it. But you still have a mandate, a mission to tell the story of Jesus. And we do that by talking to people. We do that by the way we act day in, day out, the way they see us, the way we interact with them. We are disciples of Jesus. We have a responsibility. I swore when I was at Ryerson I would never work in the field of developmental disabilities. I don't know whether God changed that or what happened, but somewhere along the lines, I ended up spending 35 years working in the field of developmental disabilities. I went from seeing no programs to seeing all sorts of programs. About 10 years ago, I saw the last of the institutions in the province of Ontario closed. The types of people I saw in the back wards, they would say would never be able to survive in the community. We proved through community programs that people could survive and have good lives and offer something. Offer it to the staff in some cases, to the other people that lived with them, small group homes. We started with group homes of 20 and got down to group homes of 2, 3, 4 people. Things changed over 35 years. It was a major, major event when we closed the institutions. I celebrated that personally, because I never want to see anyone back in that situation. Unfortunately, we're running into exactly the same problem with seniors now. They're in institutions. That's not what we should be doing. We should not be building units of 100, 200, and 300. We should be putting them back into the community where they can be interactive in the community, not isolated. But that's another story. God has given us options. God has directed us that we have to be disciples. And we will do that because we are Christian. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.